Welcome Tenno to my Heart of Deimos full launch review. For posterity, I have finished the update and gotten all of the rewards, minus the hundreds of extra deco pieces I need for my dojo, and 2 of the mech mods that I'm not going to farm until they fix the drops because the current RNG is disgusting and not worth my time. That said, I've had enough time to burn through all of the content, digest it, and reasonably do preliminary tests on most things. The background footage is going to be some Steel Path bounties on Deimos, and also some isolation vaults. Timestamps will be pinned in the comment below. If you are a new player, this will cover some of the things you want to know about. I would also highly recommend the Initiate Pack at a modest 15 USD, as it's more than worth it for a new player. My Nidus video that I would strongly encourage you to view if you get that is linked in the description. Please see that for everything Nidus from beginner to post-game. The value you get is easily worth double the price in my humble opinion, simply because of Nidus, though I am a bit biased as he's my favorite frame. If you are a returning or possibly returning player, let's get into the nitty-gritty. In short, are the rewards worth it? Yes, but with a caveat. The Helminth System is exceedingly broken and fun, and in the very worst case scenario for any player with access to it, it's going to allow you to swap any trash ability on a frame for the infested mobility without sacrificing any frames, which is objectively better than any trash ability. More speed means faster mission completion, and that's good. And from there you can subsume better abilities as well, which will provide interesting and unique niche builds, or things you can swap on any frame, or just about any frame to make it better. Not to mention some things that are just going to work for specific types of things, so there's a lot of variety there. And with that variety, you can make some really neat synergies. And that said, I will say my one disappointment is that the Warcry nerf was a bit much. Some of the other abilities are drastically superior to it. I think that it probably should have had the speed tick probably somewhere in between halfway from normal to where they actually dropped it to. I don't know the exact numbers on that, but it feels wimpy, and it makes it so that it's kind of mostly undesirable. I will also add that the isolation vaults are basically mini dungeons, and that's fun to play. I'd like to see more of that, and maybe even a raid someday. You'll enjoy these if you like the idea of a persistent set of missions for a team to embark on. Honestly, I hope DE does more of these, but bigger and longer. There's a lot more landmass in Deimos, so there's no reason not to. I will also say that the mechs are hella fun to play, even though the Exalt just got a severe nerf. But I have some severe issues with the way they launched. And now they are mostly better, so if you haven't bothered with it yet, don't worry about it, but the launch state was horrendous. It was game-breaking, it was bad, it was unusable, there was so many bugs, and it was just really frustrating, and it soured an otherwise really, really good update. That and one other thing that I'll get into a little bit later. So I would say that if you're thinking about coming back, I'm not trying to hype this up. It's actually worth checking out. You know, maybe come back, check it out, see if you like it. I think it'll probably bring a lot of players back into the game because it's just really, really well done. With that said, let's now get into some of the further details. We will start with the open world. The open world is pretty as much as infested stuff can be pretty. Literally no complaints about the visual design, but that's no surprise given that this is Warframe and that's something they always do well with. That said, this is a bit extra good on the visuals. Like compared to the Plains or even the Plains update, this is just vastly superior design. It's much more intricate and interesting, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that it's a lot more compact, so they didn't need to spread stuff out so much and use what ideas they had in such a huge space. Instead, they were just able to compact them down, and it made it a better experience overall in every direction for players. Overall, massive thumbs up on the open world design. That said, going forward, I would hope that all open worlds would be this interesting. even though maybe a little bit bigger. And I mean, it makes sense that the plains in Fortuna are pretty empty, and you know that the infested realm is jam-packed with life and stuff going on. But I would like to see things that are going to be this intricately crafted going forward. That said, there are a few bugs with the environment, like you can't do a slam attack with the mech on an enemy at this time. It has to hit the ground next to them, and that's a bit of a pain, but it's not something you can't work around until it's fixed. Additionally, while Archwings can open boxes by running into them, apparently our big ultra heavy mechs can't, which is like, what? Like, why can't I just open the boxes by stepping on them? Whereas the Archwing can just fly next to it and it pops open. It makes no sense. They really need to just fix that. It's also worth mentioning that the isolation vaults are a thing, and they are a good thing, a good design, and not terribly difficult. I strongly approve. The main drawback here is that the void energy stuff is temporarily disabled because of bugs. And that also means that NECRAMECHS sometimes just use their I'm invincible power, which is also annoying. The drop chances for the mods are horrendous, which are the two mods I was talking about that I'm not going to get until they're much more accessible. And they're like selling right now for between 200 and 500 plat. It's ridiculous. So that needs fixing really bad. Besides that, it would have been nice if they had more variety in the bosses. They're basically just copy-paste with more of them each time. Which, you know, it's good, but not good enough. Like, everything else is in the update is kind of better than that, and it kind of shows a little bit of weakness in that area. But it's not terrible, it's just not great. Overall, the Isolation Vault's a good step in the right direction. More of that, please, DE. Only bigger and with 8 people, and, you know, the R word, the raid, we would like those when our raids DE. So next we'll go into the new enemy types. I was saying before this, I really hope they add some new enemy types to mix things up, because I'm really just bored of hacking the same, you know, nonsense. And they did. They added a bunch, and that's really good. And my biggest wish on all of this was some sort of infested ceiling crawly that, you know, you had to actually like be aware of your environment for. And they made one. So my only sad face is that the new ones are just in the Cambion Drift, and I would like to see them in lots more places. Xaku, the new community Warframe, is MR fodder. There's a workshop up right now to try and fix him. In his current state, he's just garbage. But until the rework is in my hands, it doesn't exist, and while the changes look promising, without the numbers I can't really meaningfully analyze it, because, you know, saying that they're going to make it more this and more that, just, I don't know how much more this and more that, you know, so that doesn't really help. Even after that, will he be best in slot for anything? Probably not. I don't have a lot of high hopes for this frame. He does look really cool. He's got some cool idle animations. And if that's your thing and that's why you play a frame, then great. But if you want this frame to do something remarkably different and interesting, you're probably gonna be let down. The main thing that he should be able to do is hunt Eidolons, and he doesn't, because reasons. TE just decided that his void damage is different than all other void damage in the game, which is alright, eye rolls, whatever. I get that they don't want to have players just use Xaku and go and murder the Eidolons, you know, repeatedly, but like, you know, you could make it work, and they just refuse to, so that's sad. But anyway, grind him out, get the MR, and he looks cool, but his kit is just really underwhelming, and we'll see what it looks like after the first rework pass. The Helminth System. As I said, this is really cool, but it's also extremely unnecessary. However, I can set that aside in the name of fun and interesting cool mechanics. It may see some nerfs, particularly because Mag turns on God mode with it, but even so, it's a nice tool to have that changes up the game meta some, or a lot even, and that's welcome. It allows players to just kind of make things that they want to make, and like there's restrictions on it, but it's pretty cool. That said, much like Rivens and Umbral Forma, we still have nowhere to use this gear. Steel Path is a joke, and it was a joke on day one, and none of these things are required to make it a joke. You can make Steel Path solo with no Rivens and no Umbral Forma. Steel Path it's resource farming mode. That's what it is. It's not hard mode. That said, it's good to have a resource farming mode because the bile costs are a bit high, even for somebody with over 7,000 hours in mission. But in general, the system needs some balancing for resource costs. It's not terrible, but it's not great. It could have been better thought out. Some of these things are just like the amount of effort that you put into some of the resources and the amount that they want versus other resources. It makes it a no-brainer to just never use the super rare ones unless you absolutely have to. I managed to max it out in short order. It's ranked 10 out of 10, and I don't recommend that anybody does that. Don't rush it. It's best done slow and one day at a time with one thing each day, whether you're going to infuse something or feed it a Warframe. Just do one thing at a time and feed it slowly over time, because you're going to be much better off with your resources, especially if you're not somebody with mountains and mountains of resources. It's worth mentioning also that while the MR was lowered to MR8 at launch, this does not mean that it is new player friendly. I would say it's quite the opposite, and I feel that lowering the MR was a huge mistake. Not just as a gatekeeping thing, I'm not trying to keep lower level players from using it, but because it's going to confuse new players, because they're going to see it as a chase item, and realistically they can't use it. Really, the MR realistically is around like MR 20-ish when you have millions of extra resources. If you don't have that, then this thing is just a giant tease, and it's frustrating as a new player to experience that. I think some players probably will use it wisely, and that's good. But overall, it's lowering the MR was not a good idea. The only major gripe that I have about this is that I did not have enough loadouts and configs before the Helminth system, and I certainly don't after. DE, please raise the cap on the configs and loadouts, and the reason for this is very simple. Umbral Forma are needed in excess for this system. You need to have 2 in order to fit your Umbral builds on, and be able to slot things in and out and change things around for every frame that you're realistically going to use this on and have multiple builds for. And you probably already had 3 builds on that Warframe or more, and there's a cap of 6, and that means you have no more Umbral Forma, so even if you want to farm up another copy of that frame, it doesn't matter because you can't make that build again. So you're just limited to 6 configs, and that's really frustrating. And same thing with the loadouts, they need to be raised. We should have, at a bare minimum for loadouts, 1 per frame in the game. We should also probably realistically have an arrow on the configs that loads up to 6 more, and then an arrow back so you can go back to the first 6. That just makes perfect sense to me. It fits in the UI nicely, and that allows us to be able to have plenty of builds. And right now, this 6th thing was fine before, but with the Helminth system, it's just drastically not able to keep up with the needs of the player, period. Next, we'll go into the new K-Drive mods, bug riding, and K-Drive shooting. All of this does a lot to make the ultra inferior and almost universally never used K-Drives more functional. Unfortunately, they are still not, there's no good reason to use them, ever. And so they're better, but they're better trash. So, like, the only reason to ever use a K-Drive if you have an Archwing is because you feel like it, and there's no good reason to use them, and there probably never will be in the game unless they shoehorn it in somewhere. The only thing that I can think of that will save K-Drives has nothing to do with more mods and more races. I mean, yeah, having new races on the Cambion Drift, sure, that's cool. It's a new area, it's something new to see. But the thing that I would say that if you want K drives to get used, it's A, not going to happen in mission, B, not going to happen in open worlds, and C, the only place for it I can see realistically is if they give us a gigantic dojo room, and we can make huge custom tracks on it like we do with the obstacle courses, and these tracks will allow people to do races and stuff like that. It'll basically be just a new kind of obstacle course, except you're on the K drive. That would be cool. It would be a new thing to do with the dojo. People would use it, not a lot, but they would, and it would be a reason to want to get a K drive, so you could get your name on the board and do the cool new thing. But using them in open world, just no. It's not going to happen. Stop trying to make it a thing. It's not a thing. So, Infested Companions. There are 6 new Infested Companions. All of them are not going to replace Smita. Sorry. Always put the D polarity on these. There's no reason to put any other ones on because the most important things you're going to need to put on are Link Health and Link Armor, which are the most expensive mods also, and they are also always D polarity. So, just put D polarity on them. The other polarities are just universally unnecessary and ridiculous. The types that they have, you can use different kinds of resistances. I would say in general use, robotic resistances is probably going to be the way to go. You could use alloy too, but I don't like it because it's just weak in certain scenarios that you don't want it to be weak in. Overall, Smita is just better. It drastically increases your reward output, whereas nothing else does that in the game other than a booster. That said, if you really want to use one of the new companions, get the Panzer. It's good for infinite endurance runs if you don't care about resources, because it won't die and it'll just keep coming back, and it also has a little like mini sarin spore on it, which is handy. But you know, it's cool, but it's not going to replace Smita in general use, period. There are niche reasons you might want to use 2 or 3 of them, but overall, for general use, Smita is still the way to go. So the NECRAMECHS, they are hella fun to use, at least once you get to level 10, because that's when you get your Exalt. So the fun part is right. Nerfing the Arquebex was a mistake. They pulled out one of the mod slots they had on it. That means it's less useful for the one thing that it's actually good at, which is throwing out lots of damage in a Steel Path Deimos bounty. Now it does that less well, which is it feels bad. It's still good, but you could just use your Warframe at this point, you know, whatever. But having a 9th mod on it actually made a difference. It made it worthwhile and fun and a desire to want to use that ability. Now it doesn't have that. I would hope they would put it back, but my expectations are low. So the downsides are it's a little annoying to farm at first, but it's not too bad. Syndicate has no rewards really to speak of. It's literally dead once you hit max rank. Even though they just added some mods to it, it's still dead. Like once you have those mods, it's just there's not a lot there. So it needs a lot more into it to make it worth actually coming back. Like the key thing with the Syndicates on, say, Plains of Eidolon or Fortuna is that there's a reason to keep going back. There's something there that you can then sell to other players, and mods for NECRAMECHS is not it, because they're just too easily accessible. You need something like the Exodias or you know, like that or has a practical use, and some people don't want to grind for it, and it's cheap, but it's free plat if you go and do missions in those areas. There's nothing like that in Deimos, and they need to fix that. The other part of the NECRAMECHS that's interesting is that first they want 9 forma on them, and additionally, even after you put those 9 forma on, you can't fit 12 mods on it. This is a really bad math error, and it shouldn't have shipped like this, and I've been screaming about it on the forums and on Reddit and on YouTube for them to fix it, and here we are 8 hot fixes later and still not fixed. So I think they're just going to leave it broken, because this is something that should have been fixed already. It's a high priority. It's literally impossible to fit 12 mods on there unless you don't, you know, rank up your mods, which is like, what? No. So yeah, that's the ugly side of mechs, but they are still fun, so that's a thing. Anyway, we'll move on to the new mods section. So the new Carnage mods are fine if you like heavy attack builds. I don't like heavy attack builds, but if that's your thing, this will be a nice set for you to slap on your beefy tank frame and use your heavy attacks. Father also offers some pretty rad mods that are for specific weapons, and that makes them more usable as opposed to MR fodder, so that's cool. They still won't be top tier most OP weapons, but they'll be usable, and that's the important thing, is that you'll have an option to use it as opposed to just it being total trash. So that's cool. Let's move on to the storyline. The storyline is alright. It's typical Warframe, poorly written anime level writing, but some of the lore is neat, you know, which is we come to expect with Warframe. And predictably, the entire Cambion Drift has nothing to do with Arlo's storyline, which is kind of a bummer. It's like those are just two separate things, even though they're both the Infested. The main part I have with the story, and that I've seen a lot of people have with the story, is the Syndicate rank up cutscenes. Those are just really, really bad. Like, let me square this away. I think it's cool that they put cutscenes in when you rank up with a syndicate. I think all syndicates should have that. That's an awesome idea. But once again, TE did not stick the landing. These are like really super cringe bad. Never call me Iatan, and DE don't think that I didn't notice that I'm cool enough to get a name, but Grandma, who is a blood relative, is not cool enough to get a name. Nice one, okay? Nice one. Next, we'll talk about the various syndicates. We already talked a little bit about Lloyd. That's easy enough to manage. Ranking up the family isn't so bad once they added some fixes. I'm kind of super salty that they added the capture after I already grinded my butt off and got rank 5, so I can't have that as a reward now, and I'm stuck with a blueprint for a trophy that I will never use instead of a cool captura. The deco from Grandma is cool, so there's a reason to keep going back there, particularly if you're a dojo decorator. But even if you just want to pimp out your orbiter, you know, it's got some work and theme stuff, so that's cool. My main issue with the syndicates is that apparently right before launch, somebody left a drunken monkey in charge over the weekend, and they decided that all side activities that are the majority of the player base does not enjoy should be mandatory. This includes mining, fishing, and the absolute worst offender, conservation. The amount of this you need to do, especially as a dojo decorator, is horrendous, upsetting, and heinous. Besides the first round of bugs with mechs, this is the most sour portion of an otherwise good update. I mentioned it before, there's one other thing that made this update upsetting, and this is it. The forced conservation, I mean, here's the thing. They made the conservation better. You can buy tags. You can also just get animals running around in the wild a lot easier with this system. But it's still tedious, awful side grind that it's not the reason anyone plays Warframe, and they shoehorned it in instead of making it an option like it was in the past, and it was a bad design decision. That said, that's the one really negative, awful aspect to this update that is otherwise really great. And the NECRAMECHS are functional-ish now, so besides this one thing, the update is really, really good. The new weapons are, I would say, all good. They're good. They're mostly going to be B tier in their respective categories. There's maybe two exceptions to that. The Mausolon is a new arch gun you get with the mech. That's a straight up A tier. Even though they nerfed the alt fire on it, it's still just really good. I can't say that there's anything bad about it. I think that it's worthwhile. The other thing that's really nice is the Trumna. It's not as good as the Mausolon, but it's just a really nice heavy caliber machine gun that you can, it feels heavy and it just pumps heavy bullets into the enemy and it feels nice. So that said, those are the two highlights, but all of the weapons still feel good, and that might be the first for an update in as long as I can remember. Usually there's at least one trash weapon, but these are all good. Mind you, the fans were bad at launch, but they're better-ish now. They're still good, they're just not amazing. Next we will get into the Hydroid Deluxe. This is pretty cool, but not my style. I prefer my fashion with, you know, my current stuff. My main criticism here is that the Sentinel skin is for the Dirigia only, and the Dirigia is unplayable trash. Like the worst of the worst MR fodder. Meaning that outside of Captura, this will never see use. I mean, someone will for the memes, but I think they would have sold a lot more of this set if they just made it for all Sentinels. I mean, yeah, that, and it's also Hydroid, which is like, what are there, 5 Hydroid mains in total? So yeah, it's, the Dirigia skin was the highlight, and it's for Dirigia, so that's a bummer. Next up, the Deimos Swarm Pack. If you got the extra money and some deep pockets and you want to support the game, you can throw down for the Swarm Pack. I think that runs $60 if I recall, and like most packs, you're buying the plat, so if you want to support the game, that's the way to go, and then you get a bunch of side, you know, benefits from it. My chief complaint is that I can't get more than one of the infested drones, which kind of sucks. I put mine in my dojo, but like I'd like a few more, you know, one for my orbiter and a couple more for my dojo. And, you know, I wouldn't pay $60 more for each one. But the thing is, even if I would, because I lost my mind, it's simply not possible. Like, there's no other way to get this thing at this time, and that's kind of a bummer. You know, I hope they add it in the in-game shop after maybe it's exclusive for 6 months or a year. So people can feel special for having it, but that wears off, and just having more of them would be cool. The final overall grade, taking into account the game-breaking bugs at launch with the mechs and the forced conservation, but also the quality content, I'm going to give this a B+, and it's mostly because of the mechs problem at launch, and that's out of the way now. If you didn't have that, I would say this is a solid A, with the only thing keeping it from being an A+ would be the forced side activities. And also the super cringy Syndicate rank up cutscenes. That's like minus 1,000,000 points forever. That said, this is probably one of the best releases we've had in years, many years, so it's worth checking out. Alright, Tenno, that has been the full Heart of Deimos review. Thank you very much for sticking with us, and please do leave a like and subscribe.